Folks, as we go into our last panel for the day, we really want to focus on community and community building. We've talked a lot today about collaboration. We've talked a lot about communication. One of the things that you've heard mentioned several times is how much affiliation and engagement and feeling part of community, feeling part of something bigger matters, and how much that impacts participation and contribution. So in this last panel, which we are going to have moderated by Els Cuya-Jones, and we are delighted to have her with us. She is the Deputy Director of the North Star Fund, which supports communities of color and grassroots organizing efforts here in New York and the Hudson Valley. And so Els will be moderating this panel, and I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Are y'all feeling the post-lunch slump? Well, we're about to make it super exciting after that very exciting panel, because we're going to be talking about community building. Again, my name is Els Cuya-Jones. Thankfully, I didn't mess up my own name. I am at North Star Fund. I'm approaching my 10th year as Deputy Director. And what we do is we give grants to social justice movements in New York City and the Hudson Valley. And while we do give grants, we don't have an endowment. So we also fundraise, just like every other organization in this room. So I'm very excited to learn along with all of you from our esteemed panelists. So since this is the community building panel, I've asked each of our panelists to introduce themselves through their approach to community building. And I've also asked them to give me 6 descriptors, 6 adjectives to introduce themselves. So we'll start with Margaret Richardson. She is the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at GoFundMe. And the 6 words to describe her is parent, connector, advocate, optimist, doer, and storyteller. Margaret, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Els, and thank you for having us. This has been such an exciting day, and I am really honored to be on this panel with my fellow panelists. As we think about community building at GoFundMe, it is both intentional and also revelatory. Communities come to life because of events that happen, and people come together because they care, and they may not have known that they cared about the same thing in advance, but they define themselves, and they are both enduring and dynamic, and so that they evolve. And I think the ways in which that is possible, because of technology, because of creativity, because of entrepreneurship, and the passion of individuals, is something that we celebrate and we're really delighted to see every day. Just last week in New York, there was a school program for the performing arts that was under threat of closure, and a young person who wanted to participate in this program put out a GoFundMe. He was a 7th grader, and it was a high school program. And it sparked fire. It caught the attention. That's actually sort of funny that I said it that way, because Alicia Keys herself, Girl on Fire, gave to this because it was a program she had gone to. And it is that sort of thing where we are all connected to the communities that produced us and the ways in which we are the beneficiaries of it. And sometimes these moments of recognition are the ways in which we are able to really see ourselves and to see who we already are connected to.
Thank you so much for that. Next, let's hear from Nathan Chappell. He is the Senior Vice President at Donor Search AI and the author of the book, Generosity Crisis. He is a husband, father, author, inventor, beneficial AI optimist, and a philanthropy protector.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I'm a really bad test taker, so when Els asked that question, describe yourself in 6 words, I'm like, oh, how do you do that? Now I decided to torment everyone I meet now to ask them to describe themselves in 6 questions, which is great. When I think about community, I really think about myself being a product of community. I am the product of an abandoned father and an extremely hardworking mother who showed lots of love. And also, while we were in food lines, and at lines at Christmas to get gifts, we also understood the responsibility of giving back. And so community for me looked like when our roof started leaking, people from our church would come help repair it. Or when there was a senior home that needed a wheelchair ramp, I learned how to, cut wood with a saw. And so, if I think about my life, obviously no surprises if you allow the universe to kind of guide you and take you where you're going. It's really around this idea of community. Now, I think community and how we build community is different, and I think it's much more challenging than historically when we look at like Alexis de Tocqueville, how he talked about affiliation and association. I think we have to work harder at it, but I really think it's measured in this connection and how we connect with one another. I do think that we have to work harder to build that connection now.
Thank you so much. Sarah Lomelin, the CEO of Philanthropy Together. She is a Latina, a mother, community builder, extrovert, agitator for good, and a Cancerian.
Hi, everybody. I see hands up. Awesome. My name is Sara Lomelin. As you are going to, figure out by the accent, I am not from here. I am a proud Mexican-American now, and I have been in the US for 28 years. And my community is not a community of donors. We never call them donors, actually. It's a people power philanthropy. We go back to the roots of the word philanthropy, of love of humanity. We are kind of the underdogs of philanthropy. People tend to talk about collective giving or giving circles as, oh my God, giving circles are cute. No, we're not cute. We're extremely powerful movement, totally decentralized. There are giving circles all over the world. It can be, 10 people around a kitchen table, sharing some meals and deciding what to do in their local community. It can be a group of 500 people moving $3 million a year. What our community is that we are not donors, we're doers. It's the people that are not waiting for a millionaire or a billionaire to come and save that particular community. It's people that are taking action. They're seeing what needs to be done and they're doing it. Giving circles are not new. They're not American. They have been, it's the concept of people banding together to create change is as old as humanity itself. And it's rooted particularly in communities of color, in indigenous communities. So when people said, ooh, what you're doing is super innovative, it's not. It's not rocket science. It's basically going back to the basic idea of looking at other people, other person in the eyes and creating a connection and finding what unites us instead of what makes us different.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm going to jump in before we introduce Daryl. But along the lines of giving circles, not being cute, not being innovative, I have to agree. At North Star Fund, we run something called the Giving Project, which is very much like a giving circle. And we raise about $20 million a year. And more than half of the gifts that we get are less than $200. So it's pretty significant, these smaller gifts given in community. So finally, let's hear from Daryl Griffin. He is the National Associate Executive Vice President at American Heart Association. And his words are husband, father, trailblazer, visionary, traveler, enthusiast, and Libra. Now, I know that's 7 words, but he's a Libra, I'm a Libra, so I gave him some Libra privilege, and that's why he got away with 7.
It's all about the balance, right? And I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm Daryl Griffin, serving at the American Heart Association. When I think about community, I can tell it in a narrative form from my own life. I was impacted by a spark. My spark in my life, because I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I grew up to a single mom. I grew up in a very depressed community. A lot of the communities that many of our organizations try to impact is the community that I come from. And so I speak representing those who tend not to have a voice in a lot of these discussions. but it was a spark. It was my grandmother who taught me how to see beyond my surroundings and not let it be defining for me. It was a professor when I was a freshman at Vanderbilt, when I went in for engineering, that I was in a 1-hour community service class at the Susan Gray School for Children that changed the whole trajectory of my professional journey. It caused me to be in a position that when I was asked in interviews, what is it that you want to do in 5 or 10, I think that's the worst interview question that is asked, but what do you want to do in 5 or 10 years? I don't know. All I know is I want to help people. That's all I want to do. And as a result of that, I was impacted by another spark. My chief development officer, when I was unit director at the Boys and Girls Clubs, and I asked her, what is it that you do? Because I'm working with kids and I'm working with families, but you raise money. Talk to me about this. And then that took me to the Association of Fundraising Professionals that led me to the Lilly School of Philanthropy, that really took me down this other journey that leads me to where I am right now, which is designing scalable fundraising solutions for the American Heart Association to drive increased mission impact in communities that we serve across the country. And to the point that was made earlier around social determinants, zip codes do matter. They do have an impact on life expectancy. They do have an impact on your hope or hopelessness in terms of the way that you see life and approach it. Because if you have hope, you'll make decisions today that will impact your future. Hopelessness is about survival, and you're going to make day-to-day decisions that may or may not be the best. But all you're doing is working around surviving the day. And so priorities change and shift. And so at the AHA, one of the things that we do is we believe that everyone deserves the opportunity for a full, healthy life. And we know that heart disease is our #1 killer. You put all forms of cancer combined, it still pales in comparison to deaths from cardiovascular disease and stroke. And so this relentless effort that we have as an organization will not stop until we eradicate heart disease and give people the life that they deserve.
Thank you so much. I really love these stories. Nathan, when we first spoke, I told you that I was a Luddite and I have not yet tried out ChatGPT. You are in the AI space and use that for fundraising. Now, you also talk about this thing called radical connection, which Sarah brought up, radical connection. How do you reconcile radical connection and something that is artificial?
Oh, wow, this is like a talk show gotcha kind of thing. Spent all night thinking of that question. No, to be honest, so I spent 20 years as a fundraiser and in leading fundraising teams, and did very well. But realized that we were using words like build a better mousetrap, which in fact I heard someone repeat yesterday, and it wasn't me. So I feel awful about using those words from a donor, from a fundraising context, and when I kind of look back at the type of fundraising that we did for so long, it became so transactional that we were essentially incentivized to build a better mousetrap. And essentially what we were doing as an industry is using a lot of wealth data, essentially equating wealth with philanthropy, and never settled well with me. And I shared earlier, I'm a major fan of Giving USA and started researching, essentially the evolution of mega gifts back in 2012 after the Giving Pledge. And fast forward, I think what we got to is this, type of fundraising that became very, very transactional, that we use a lot of technology that moved the pendulum so far from what we knew to be true, and this idea of like people give because of connection. And at the same time, being a technologist, I looked at what the private sector was doing in terms of, increasing lifetime value and increasing retention of consumers that really didn't have anything to do with their wealth. And so we started experimenting in 2017, and we decided to remove all wealth data, throw it into machine learning models, and essentially identify the quality of connection that a person had today, and then tomorrow, and then 2 months, and then 2 years, to realize that, A, people are not either a donor or a prospect. They are not the same today as they will be tomorrow or 2 months. That people are on a journey that either will care more about an organization or less about the organization over time based on, that can be measured based on that data. So I think used properly, AI can actually allow you to understand people If you are very conscious about what bias is and removing bias and continuing to improve data sets, to do surveys and mine that data to really understand what is the quality of connection, how do you quantify that, so that I can then have the dividend of time to spend more time human to human. And so that's why I remain an AI optimist. While it has tremendous power for harm, it also has tremendous power for good and allowing us to connect with people in newer and deeper ways and allow nonprofits to be more efficient than they've ever been.
Amazing. Have you connected with the Ideas 42? I wonder how that's like fitting with the behavioral science stuff. Margaret, can you tell us how, and I'm not trying to gotcha, Nathan. That was not what I'm trying to do here. How or what GoFundMe organizers can teach us about building community?
So one of the things that organizers do is they write their story, and it's often a story on behalf of someone else, or it can be their own story, but they tell it in their own words with passion and with dignity. And then they share that story with their community, and it inspires hope. It is an act of hope to ask for help, but it's also an act of hope to give help. And then it gives everyone that sense of agency and that ability to tell your story. That, I think, is one of the things that is undervalued in terms of the process of actually fundraising. Is being the spokesperson of what you care the most about is so important. And then for donors, or excuse me, for those organizers, we often hear that when they get donations, it's the words of support, which are often quite short. If you've ever used our platform, it's, 20 words or less that fit there. But it's like, look at all these people who see me and care enough about what I am saying to contribute. Or they don't contribute, but they share it on beyond their community. So that sense of being able to invite people into community, I think, is the greatest lesson, and that ability to continue to share, even if you don't give, and the power of being able to mobilize your network to support something you care about, even if it isn't financially, I think is a great lesson for all of us as we think about how we can address the apparent decline in generosity in some ways.
Sarah, we are talking about this notion of fundraising going from being donor-centric to community-centric. But in giving circles, it's a group of donors who pool their money, and then the donors make the decision as to where the money goes. So how do those two things meet up?
I love that question. And I am going to first follow up on what Margaret said, because in collective giving, we talk about the 5 T's. People that are part of giving circles, part of collective giving, not only give their treasure, right? But they give their time, their talent, their testimony. You're talking about, using your voice to advocate for those causes that you care about, and your ties. Each of us is part of different networks, so you open the doors to, the organizations, the nonprofits, the initiatives that you care about. And a lot of times, 90% of the times, that is more important for that organization than the amount of money that you can give. So that is how, people in giving circles put community first. A lot of the times, for me as a Mexican, as a Latina, we are invisible to philanthropy. People don't ask us to give money. People make assumptions, right? To the Black community, to the Latino community, to the many different communities, people assume that we are recipients of philanthropy, but we cannot be philanthropists. And that is the worst that you can do as a fundraiser, as a nonprofit leader, right? Never assume who can give and who cannot give. So what is happening, a lot of members of giving circles are members from the same community that they are supporting, right? So you have this beautiful kind of full circle where I have many stories of, giving circle grants night, right? So you hear from the organizations, you are meeting the nonprofit leaders, and that leader would call me the day after and said, Sara, can I join the giving circle as a donor? Like, I would love to be part of that. So that you have this beautiful, group of people that you get the voices of the community, you get this peer learning inside that same, small group of people. And I'm telling you, it could be 10 people, right? But if you have a very diverse group of people, because they can be, from different aisles in the political spectrum, they can be from, different backgrounds, different migration stories, but all of them can be, behind supporting financial literacy of women and girls, right? They find those values that they shared as a group, and they can leave all their, individual decisions, or their, this whole idea of it's my money and I'm going to decide. Everything gets put in the back burner for the putting community first.
Thank you so much. Daryl, the American Heart Association is about to be 100 years old. I imagine fundraising was a little bit different in 1924. A little bit. I don't know, I'm not sure.
Slightly.
Tell me, 100 years in, how do you think about risks and when you want to try new things and innovate?
Well, I'll put it in this perspective. So, 4 years ago, because I've been with the organization roughly around 10 years. When I came back, I'm a boomerang, so I had a 2-year sabbatical and then came back right at the height of the pandemic to really lead our issue-based fundraising efforts as our traditional models had shifted. So when you talk about risk, when the country shut down, we couldn't have heart walks, heart balls, Go Red for Women luncheons, things of that nature. And so we had to shift our whole approach to how we came to the market. And so we focused or leaned in more on what are the risk factors, because everyone in society learned about comorbidities. And if you had asthma, or if you had diabetes, or if you were physically inactive, your potential for COVID shot through the roof. Additionally, your potential for impact with a heart disease or heart event also spiked. And so we had to focus on what are the things, the controllables, the 80% of the risk factors that people can leverage to prevent a cardiac event. So leaning into how do we control tobacco and vaping? How do we help people to control their blood pressure? How do we increase physical activity? How do we address community need by addressing community readiness and preparedness for any other type of event that may emerge? How do we help people with their mental health and well-being, which became the issue of the present right now, because it is a byproduct of the pandemic, is mental well-being, loneliness that people are feeling right now. And so that was a shift for us. How do we declare, which we did, structural racism as a definite barrier to equitable health for all? That was a risk for our organization to take, to even step into a space that traditionally you wouldn't think that we'd be in. But we're there, we've been rooted there, but we had to elevate it so that everyone everywhere could understand how the Heart Association is advocating on your behalf for your health. And my lather is going right now because I'm a former athlete, and when I get put into the game, I get charged. And I'm charged because I'm passionate. And I lost my brother to a sudden cardiac arrest on August 21st, 2020, and when he had just turned 40. And he had been obese, and he was he had just lost over 100 pounds. He was doing all of the right things, and he still lost his life. And so I am more passionate now more than ever about the work of the American Heart Association, the benefit that we have to society as a whole, but also the power that we each have in our hands to do something about it. And so I get charged up about that, and so I appreciate just the opportunity to share.
Thank you for that, Daryl. We are siblings in that we both lost a brother before their time. I would like to throw this question to the whole panel, whoever would like to take it on. There is structural racism, huge polarization in our country right now. There are wars and conflicts all over the world, and we are in a climate crisis. How are you thinking about how building a community and strengthening our communities through your work can help move the needle just a little bit forward every day? Like, what is the thing that gets you up in the morning?
I can start.
Thank you.
I feel that, since this morning, when, Jane, you were talking about people are not going to church anymore, right? Like we used to go 20 years ago, 50 years ago. Those places where we used to find community. When you would move to a new city or a new neighborhood, you will go to the church, right? Because that's where you would find people with your same values. It's not there anymore, and especially for younger people. So we have to recreate those spaces in a different way. And I think with COVID, this whole thing of being virtual made us think outside the box. And that is why, and you are going to be tired of me, I'm like a broken record, the whole idea of a giving circle, of creating a sense of belonging, of something that is bigger than yourself, and in a space where you can share your perspective and learn to listen to another person's perspective without, going to the, to the kill if they think differently than you, is a way how we can start. And again, I have seen this many times with so many different communities. There is a young woman in Arizona, high schooler, 16 years old. Her mom was part of a giving circle, and she said, I'm going to start something in my school. And her goal was to get 100 teenagers in a giving circle. She didn't get 100 teenagers. She got 180 teenagers. She just called 10, and those 10 each of them called 10. Each kid gives $25 a quarter. They get together, they have a DJ, they have food. They have been able to mobilize more than $40,000 going to tiny grassroots organizations that, do work in things that are important for them. Their parents are not telling them what organizations to give to. No one is telling them. What do they care? They care about mental health. They care about, homelessness in adolescents. They care about, fighting addictions. Those are the causes that these kids are, funding. Right now, Lily, 2 years later, she's now 18, she's starting college. She has helped get started other 30 giving circles. She's like training 30 different groups of teenagers all over the world. Like there's one in Pakistan, there's another in Canada, there's another in Mexico. So when people said, oh, I'm not wealthy enough, or I don't have the time, or I don't have, like literally, this again, it's easy to do it.
I love that. Actually, it was one of Sarah or one of her teammates when I first met her shared a sentiment that the future of philanthropy is local, and easy to memorize. It was something that just felt like so true, is that in this world of like very complicated world, not that your organization has to be local, but it has to feel local, right? And so that is really the grand challenge. And as you kind of, say just a few of the things that we, wake up to and go to bed with every night, I mean, it's a daunting world. I think I remain optimistic, even though I wrote a book called The Generosity Crisis, that doesn't get me invited to a lot of dinner parties, but the subtitle is The Case for Radical Connection to Solve Humanity's Greatest Challenges, and that's really the sense of like coming back together and coming back to center and doing more of what we know to be true. I think what is so encouraging right now, why we should be optimistic, is that we know more about where philanthropy is worldwide. So, Generosity Commission and all of those in the room that shared that. So knowledge is power. We can take action on that. Are we going to just sit around and let that happen, or are we going to take active steps to reverse it? We also know more about the motivations of giving thanks to AI, which largely has a lot more to do with engagement and connection than it does wealth or the other things that we've been using historically. And so I think we're living in this time where like we've got the knowledge, we have awareness, and it's really up to us in this generation today to actually make the change. Because if we draw a straight line in the US, the decline in charitable participation ends in 49 years. It's like the simplest math you could do. None of us want to envision a world that's less generous than it is today, so let's stop it. Like, let's get together, let's take that knowledge and, stop the bleeding and move it forward by using best practices in all these things, and such great sentiment today on how to do that.
I'd say, how do we continue to lean in to meet people where they are and inspiring that passion and commitment in younger generations that are coming forward? You think about, the seeds that we can plant in our children to give. I have 3 daughters myself. My oldest actually turns 31 tomorrow, and I have a 22-year-old and an 18-year-old, and each of them have invested into giving as part of their professional journey. And how do we continue to catalyze that among all of those within our spheres of influence? To me, that's how we continue to keep this philanthropic spirit alive. We talked about how do we leverage it to uphold our democracy. It's critically important that we get back to the fundamentals of connecting people. You asked about 100 years, and in 1924, we started with the Dear Neighbor program, where we were going just door to door to people in our community. I'd ask how many people even know their neighbors, where we couldn't even roll out a program like that in 2024 because of the lack of connection, the cocooning that's happening in our communities. And so there's this call to action to us to get back to the fundamentals of connection and establishing the joy in this work that we call philanthropy. There's supposed to be love at the fundamental foundational ethos of it. And so we get into the numbers, the data, all of the things, but at the end of the day, we're still people. And people give to people. And so how do we stay connected to those things that really guide us and move us to do the right things moving forward?
I love that. And you asked what gets us up in the morning. And for me, it's the stories of people doing those things. There is a young man named Dewan Strickland outside of St. Louis, Missouri, and he was not allowed to eat lunch one day because he had lunch debt. This is a problem across America in school districts where kids, if they can't pay for lunch multiple days in a row, they're not able to eat. And he experienced that and decided no kid in his school should have to experience it. So he started a GoFundMe, and he wanted to pay off the lunch debt for his whole school over the summer so that no kid would come back to school hungry. And he did it, but then he so far exceeded his goal, he paid off the whole school district. And then he was invited on Jennifer Hudson, and then he was able to, he and his mom who had to let him tell this story, which for her was a risk, right? And this bravery and courage has paid it forward so many times over. And for me, that is a reminder that there's so much each of us can do, and we have to do it. We absolutely have to do it.
I got dibs on this kid's name because I know you all want to hire him as soon as he graduates from college.
I want him to hire me.
Yes. We all need folks like that in our development teams and leading the way. This is the part where I am going to outsource my moderator duties. I'm going to ask a question, but then I also want the audience, for those of you who have any questions, to think about something to ask one of our panelists. I'm going to throw a question out there, and then the person who responds, you can then ask a question to any of the other panelists, and then we'll mix it up. Yeah, mix it up. Why not? I wanted this to be a conversation, you know? We also wanted folks to have agency so that we leave this room feeling like we know what we need to do, what's next, what is facing us, not be daunted by challenges, but you have a good takeaway of what you want to do tomorrow morning. So who wants to take that on? Like, what is it that you know needs to happen given all of these conflicts and the struggles that come with the competition for our attention, the fact that I don't want to say that people don't care because we've heard all throughout the day how much people really do care. But there is this kind of apathy that does exist. We want to grow our mission and we want to expand. So how do we get to those untapped audiences and people? What is it that you are going to do? Who wants to answer that? And then you get
Well,
to ask.
maybe I'll answer a little bit, but I want to ask a question to Margaret. But
You're gonna do both?
I'll do both. Okay.
do
Well,
both.
I'll do both.
Yeah, you got it.
You know, I mean, when it comes to, I mean, we've studied and researched this a lot. I mean, you know, I think one of the encouragements is we already know how to do this. The giving is a pro-social behavior. So forget everything you think you know about Connection. Go back and we actually created a framework. Anyone who wants a free copy of the Generosity Crisis, send me a note in LinkedIn and I'll send you a PDF of it and you can throw it into ChatGPT and interrogate it. You know, is essentially a rubric and really, I mean, ask your donors. Like, I mean, the simplest thing is like, you know, where are you on the scale of like you know us or you love us. And so we actually created a framework in our book that actually goes through these questions that we all know to be true. It's like the places that we go out of our way for, the things that we brag about, the things that we get excited and our heart races when we talk about, versus those that are like, I mean, what a simple thing is just go ask your donor. So, I mean, I think that is just something that's so overlooked and that data is so powerful, getting to the heart of, you know, essentially where people are at and then knowing how to address them. And I think for the most part, and my question to Margaret would then be, we've often thought about generosity and charitable giving kind of as this ubiquitous term that it's, you know, it's just all one, it's either this, it's all volunteer, or it's all, you know, financial. And I think we have the freedom now to realize, and I want to know, because I think you've done some work in this to really experiment with the idea that it can start one way and then end up the other way. And so we don't have to pick and choose. Is that?
Yes, I think that's a really important thing also for all of us. I mean, it's exactly what Sarah was saying. I think that, you know, there's all these different ways, and none of us are just one thing, right? We all are all at times people who need help and people who can give help, and it's all different kinds of help. And the more we recognize each other on that level, the more I think that we are able to sort of get out of the fear of what feels very overwhelming in the news or, you know, sometimes right outside your door, but to then be able to act and be able to toggle really between those identities that we all have. You asked a question a little bit about, you know, there's an apathy, but I actually think, or at least the way I experience it in my own life, it may be a mismatch of timing and intention. I can't focus on that right now. And I think if we can do a better job as the people seeking the support, or inviting other people who are seeking to support, not to give up if the first thing you try didn't work, but to think about, you know, get curious. And I think to Nathan's point, like this idea of ask why, that can be really scary because you find out something you don't want to know maybe, and then you have to do something with it. But those, I think, are some of the things that we can really do to be braver, but also to be more effective more quickly. And I'm supposed to ask a question? Okay, so I'm going to ask Daryl, as we think about there's sometimes a dichotomy, and it actually didn't really come up today, which was great, but this idea of individual giving and organizational giving. And my thought is that it takes every kind of giving of everything, but I'd love to hear how the American Heart Association or organizations with these very strong legacy programs with, you know, long-term complicated missions, how can we as people who can mobilize sometimes much more emergent type of behaviors and activities support each other, and where are the places where coming together can create more power for community?
I think it really hinges on understanding that the definition of community is ever evolving. And when we really root ourselves into meeting people where they are, but also understanding how we all fall in the pendulum of impact is how we can collaborate. And it's finding those synergies that is really important to us, because all of us embrace community. And so it's not owned by any one of us. And in fact, it's actually owned by the people who live there, who have that lived experience. And so we're to be invited to their table versus looking at it as bringing people to ours. And so it's just a reframing and reshaping how we approach it. Really, it allows us not to be viewed as being tone deaf. And that often happens, again, as a community organizer, person who came out of the community when I first started in the nonprofit sector. That was one of the biggest barriers to letting nonprofits come in, because they all came in with prescription and not with listening and understanding and wanting to understand what the real needs were from the people who were experiencing whatever that negative impact was or is. And I think that's where, as organizations, we can really come and find alliances, is understanding that we don't have to go in with all the answers, but we have to go in with a lot of questions.
While you think of a question for Sarah, I want to just add to what you're saying, in that when North Star Fund funded the group of nail salon workers to survey nail salon workers across New York City to find out if they're being treated well, if they're getting the proper training, the right ventilation, the right safety measures, just to find out what is going on. And it came out in the New York Times that all of these violations were happening. And then Governor Cuomo at the time saw the article and said, I'm going to start a commission of government. And the nail salon workers were like, no, you're not. We are going to be a part of that governing body. We are going to make the decisions. Just to speak to what you're saying about having the community let us in. So if you got a question for Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah, my question for you is, when you think about everything that we've heard today and all that we've discussed, what are your hopes and dreams for the philanthropic sector moving forward?
No pressure. I thought it was not gotcha. Okay. I do think, as you know, Jane mentioned, as Asha mentioned, I do think the future of philanthropy is collective. It's not about individual philanthropy. You all need to, give the everyday donors a chance again. Because I remember last year going to the Generosity Commission. I said, I don't see a generosity crisis where in the universe where I, gravitate. I see people, in Singapore going and helping families in need, like, 6 families wrapping another family, not only with financial support, but with, friendship and home-cooked meals and companionship. I see, a lot of people in India, in Mexico, in the US, in everywhere, mobilizing for their communities. I mean, when Asha showed all these pictures, that is what the future of philanthropy should be. The everyday people, the everyday givers, it's new money. That money is not competing with corporate money, with foundation money. I know it's very, flashy to see, Mackenzie Scott, as you mentioned, gave all this money, and you're like, oh my God. We cannot just get starstruck. Because yes, a lot of those organizations, when she started giving these big grants, the organizations were having these issues that, my God, now everybody thinks we're set for life and nobody's giving us, right, anymore. And no, we need to, it's a combination of things, right? We need to take the whole concept of overhead and put it in the trash can. I mean, if someone else tells me like, oh my God, your overhead is huge. Yeah, well, I need to pay good salaries. I need to attract talent. We need to pay rent. We need to pay, utilities. Again, not assuming and thinking outside the box. The people that you never thought could be your, long-term supporters are going to be the ones. Also, invest in them, because it's not only, I feel that today we're talking about 2 things, right? One is mobilizing more funding, but the one and the most important one is democracy, and it's the fabric of the society. And if we allow people to be apathetic, we are in trouble. And you know what? If we have a handful of billionaires that are very civically engaged, that is not going to help. We need the millions of people to be civically engaged. And the way people get engaged in democracy and with their communities is by learning, by awareness, by giving those $5, $10, $20, starting to have the appetite of volunteering, of being part of a commission, of being part of the neighborhood association. So just think about all those aspects.
Yes. While you think of a question for one of the panelists, we'll take a question from the audience. And before that audience question, I just have to do this thing. I really, really apologize. My mom is 83 years old, and no matter where I work, she will give, even though she doesn't understand what I do. I've been working in nonprofit for over 20 years. She still doesn't quite get it. So I'm so sorry, but I have to take a selfie. I'm going to take a selfie. And then thank you so much for indulging me for a second. Okay, here we go. Someone else take Yeah, we can do that too. But selfies are really fun. And then let's see. Sorry. Okay, all right. Can you cheer? Can you put your hands up so that I look? I look. Yeah, all right. We should be here too. I know. What do you want to say? Us. Here we go. Oh, get in. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for that. Question from the audience.
A little bit of a question, a little bit of a challenge, and I also. It's going to sound really like a downer at first, I promise. I don't want it to be a downer necessarily. But I want to just point out the scale of the issue that we are talking about here. And this is a 100 million plus person issue in the United States alone of this generosity crisis, whether you want to think about it in dollars or really involvement, philanthropy. And everyone here and all the organizations here are really exceptional. But that's kind of the problem, is that they are the exception. It's wonderful that there are these people raising money on GoFundMe, but for every person raising money, not only is there 100 not, we know that number is increasing. The need is growing even as these organizations exist. And so, to me, the friction of today a little bit has been the fact that all of what we have talked about is great and wonderful, but also we know for a fact right now it's not enough and not working. And so my challenge is then for this room of brilliant people who are extremely involved and pretty well connected on various levels, what does that roadmap for actually fixing this problem look like?
I can jump in on that a little bit.
If I know now who gets invited to less dinner parties than I do. So you take that.
That was good. I would say that it's rooted in the fundamental, regardless of cause, we have to focus on three fundamental things. We have to continue to leverage curiosity to educate and inform. We have to focus on how do we compel people to care. And then ultimately, how do we inspire them to take action? And it's that repeated process, like behavior change, modification. It's the consistency of a message over duration of time. That's how you create behavioral change. We have to root ourselves in that fundamental practice and know that there's going to be a positive outcome at the end of it.
I couldn't agree more. And GoFundMe has a community of 150 million people who have given on the platform. And I think that scale, obviously I hear what you're saying about the scale of the issue, but the idea that people don't want to, I think, is we've sort of foreclosed the possibility of a solution. I think if we are committed to a long-term change and a long-term shift, and the reality is this is not just this sector's challenge. There is a public sector gap that the social sector is having to fill, so I think that is also part of engaged democracy and thinking about how do we hold people accountable. There's no reason a child should be having to raise money so his classmates can eat. Right. That's crazy. And this is, and I think there's examples of that all over the world right now. So I do think there is a multi-sector commitment. And I also think, I want to go back to what Asha said, like the future is coalition. It is not about any one of us or any one of our organizations doing this together, and we are stronger together in every possible way. And I think that that will be transformational. And again, it's going to be over time, but it is going to happen.
And I would add, before I ask a question to Nathan, stop treating people like transactions. Like, I mean, how many emails do each of us get every single day with an ask, right? We don't even open them. Why? Because it's the mass email. So it's going again back to building relationships and taking the time of building relationships. And it's a long-term game. But on that term, I want to ask Nathan, because you are in this intersection of tech, nonprofits, generosity, AI. You deal with a lot of corporate partners. What do you see from the tech companies in terms of them wanting to engage more in communities, and not in the sense of, oh yes, we're great, pat on the back, but really trying to make a change?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes along with that, the idea of scale as well. I mean, I think if we look at the data, corporate giving hasn't really increased forever, right? It's pretty much stayed stagnant. Now, I think the way corporations are engaging their employees is different, right? So from acquisition retention, having a healthy corporate involvement is something that's gone way beyond, marketing. And so I do see a lot more intangible benefit that corporations are involved in. And most people, when surveyed, say they want corporations to be more involved in civic engagement. So the way we make purchases now are largely, way more influence. I think over 50% of people won't buy from an organization that defies their personal values. So it says that, I think this is part of, the promise and the problem, is that corporations have now truly understand the correlation between the heart and the wallet. Whereas the nonprofits, like that was our playbook for a really long time. And so I see there's a lot more, and I think that, essentially employees will vote with their feet. Those corporations that don't get involved in their community, that don't, live their values, and they'll leave. And we see that happen all the time. I do want to say on the scale issue, and I'm super biased on this, obviously, because I work in AI, we intended to reserve a chapter in our book on what was that thing. And we spent 2.5 years really thinking about what was that thing. And it's like, tell people to go back to church, and it's like, well, that's not going to go very far. And, so like we experimented so many different things, and we saw amazing organizations like Philanthropy Together and GoFundMe and others that were really teaching the virtues of giving at a very immediate, even basic level sometimes, to remove all those barriers. I think it calls into question that if nonprofits, it will exist in the future, they have to be an amplifier of generosity, not a deterrent. Because essentially people will vote away from giving to a 501c3 if they feel like that is not something that's amplifying their generosity. And I think, Charity Water, which I talk about a lot, is such a good example of like bringing you in and then helping you amplify, that my gift is now amplified times X, to make this difference. So I'm biased in the saying that, the only scalable solution that we could come up with is AI, essentially. It's at scale, being able to use the same tool that got us into the issue for a lot of reasons, can also get us out. And there's tremendous promise of using AI in a responsible and beneficial way to help organizations better understand their constituents in a much more intimate way in real time. But that's going to take a pretty radical shift and an investment in things like innovation, which the nonprofit sector tends to shy away from.
Thank you. Looks like we have time for another audience question.
All right. Hi. I have a question for Margaret. Thinking back on some of the earlier slides we saw today, and thinking about the amount of people that would rather give, for example, to someone, in need in person on the street, things like that, as opposed to an established charity, it does remind me of what happens within the GoFundMe platform in kind of this digital space. And then I've been a part of so many meetings, fundraising, brainstorming, that kind of stuff, and GoFundMe comes up. And it's like, what about if we did something like GoFundMe does? And it's like, well, it's different, especially we work with a group of people who've been assaulted and need to remain anonymous, so we have additional things to overlap, or get through. But I think my question for you is, what do you think about the magic of GoFundMe and the things happening there that could be transferable outside to this really, tax deductible, more established giving space? And then my other question is, stepping outside of my own nonprofit and how I want us to succeed this next fiscal year, that kind of stuff, do you feel any hesitation about, are we doing a disservice to something broader to conflate these two things and try to turn this more established nonprofit sector into this GoFundMe type experience, when really GoFundMe really is about hey, my mom needs to help pay, for her sister's, funeral bill, things like that. Are we actually going to erode trust of something really beautiful that's happening when we as a nonprofit swarm it and decide we can do this too?
Thank you for the question. I think my initial reaction is I actually think all the approaches are necessary, and I think it kind of goes back to what Daryl was saying of meeting people where they are. There's some people who may never be interested in either using or being or having a GoFundMe, and there may be people who are that is the thing that they feel most comfortable with. I think that being able to and you can raise money on GoFundMe for nonprofits, and so if anyone's interested in that, you can do it. But I think the way it works best, or the way we've seen it work best, is when it is a supporter telling why they care about the nonprofit, and then them activating their community, which again can be done by any nonprofit in any way. It can be done in person. I think it's very much the giving circle model of this, what should we come together and do? And thinking about this, I think, is another thing that I would say, I don't think we should collapse any of these and homogenize them. I think we need to diversify our approaches and meet people with authentic and credible and responsive strategies for them to raise money, for them to get the help and support they need for the things they care about, but also for them to be able to share what it is they can share, whether it is one of the 5 T's, which I'm not going to try and recite, but we got them, and or just thinking about, I'm going to be able to tell the world that this is an important thing that I read about. And that, I think, making those opportunities accessible in as many ways and as many times as possible, that's what I think is the future. And it's not, I hope, never an either or.
Are there any other audience questions? Final one. Yes, right here. Oh, sorry.
Okay, well, thank you. It's not a question, it's just a thought. Thank you for what you shared about the community engagement. I was just thinking about what you said, Sarah, about the link between democracy and donations. In France, giving some blood is free. And the institution, the public institution in charge of collecting blood, has faced some drastic drop of donation. So they had a study they studied the behavior of the donors, the blood donors, and blood is something we all have, and it can be well, we have capacity of creating more blood, etc. So it's free gift, a free donation, and so it's not linked to the level of the standard of living and the income, etc. But the study reveals that the donors, the blood donors, are people from are people that are integrating in a society, and so I think it's linked with what you said about democracy, inclusion, and being a donor, even for free donations.
Thank you so much for that comment. I'm going to ask, I want to thank you all for being here, and then ask the esteemed panelists to close with a word to leave you. And what I want to leave you with is to your question about scale and everything like going to hell, is I recently was at the Let Us Breathe Forum, which the Let Us Breathe Fund is here in New York City and supports Black-led grassroots organizing. And one of the leaders there, Lumumba Bandele, who is the founder of Black August and a part of the movement for Black Lives, he said, and they're words that stayed with me for a long time and will continue to, victory is certain if we make it certain. I believe that that is true. I also believe the reverse is true. So if things are going to go to hell, what I want for me is that I'm going to die trying. Like, I'd rather be on this side, optimistic, fighting, working, running, standing up, doing it all, rather than shrugs. All right, who wants to start? Just one word.
One word. Relentless. Don't stop.
I think coalition, to plagiarize my word, that is the future.
Just do it. I know it's a Nike slogan, but just do it. Like, don't think it, just do it.
I think mine has to be reboot.
Cool. Thank you so much, Daryl, Margaret, Sarah, Nathan. Thank you.